Okay, so this might finally be happening. After years of watching Samsung, Google, Honor, Huawei, and everyone else experiment with foldable phones, Apple may finally be ready to do one. But here's the interesting part. Apple's first foldable probably won't be interesting because it folds. That part is old now. The real question is this: what has Apple been waiting for? Because foldables have been around for years. Apple could have made one a long time ago. They didn't. So either Apple was late or Apple was waiting until it could fix the things people still complain about: the crease, thickness, battery life, durability, and that ridiculous price. And one of those problems could be handled very differently on Apple's version. We'll get to that. But first, let's talk about what this thing could actually look like. Because this probably isn't a flip phone. Think more like a book-style foldable. Closed, it behaves like a normal iPhone. Open it, and suddenly you've got something much closer to a small iPad. Reports around Apple's foldable plans have pointed toward an inner display somewhere around the 7.7 to 7.8 inch range. That's important, because a normal Pro Max already gives you a huge screen. So if Apple is going to ask people to carry a thicker phone and pay a much higher price, the inside screen has to feel genuinely different, not just a little bigger. Around 7.8 inches puts it into mini tablet territory, and the outside display has been reported around the 5.5 inch range. Now that sounds small compared with modern iPhones, but there's a reason that could actually work. When the phone is closed, Apple may want something narrow enough to use comfortably with one hand. Open it, and you get the big display. That's actually a smarter approach than making the outside screen enormous and ending up with a huge brick when the device is folded. But screen size isn't the part I'm watching most closely. It's the crease. Because if you've used a foldable before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You open the phone, looks great. Then light hits the screen at the wrong angle and there it is. That line through the middle. You can feel it with your finger. You can see it when the screen is dark. And after paying nearly $2,000, that little valley becomes very hard to ignore. This may be one of the biggest reasons Apple waited. Apple has reportedly been working on hinge and display structures designed to reduce the visible crease. Not just hide it with software. Actually reduce the mechanical stress that creates it. And if Apple manages to make the crease dramatically less visible than current foldables, that could be the first real Apple moment with this product. Because honestly, if Apple releases a foldable with the same obvious crease everyone else already has, then what exactly did we wait for? And the hinge is connected to something else. Thickness is where foldables still struggle. A normal phone is already full of stuff. Battery, cameras, processor, cooling, speakers. Now split that phone into two halves, add a hinge and somehow keep it thin. Not easy. A first-generation Apple foldable has been rumored to target a very thin profile when open. Some reporting has suggested roughly 4.5 millimeters per half, which would put the folded device around the 9 to 10 millimeter range before camera protrusions. If Apple gets anywhere close to that, that matters. Because current book-style foldables can feel very different from normal phones once folded. A few extra millimeters doesn't sound like much on paper. In your pocket, you feel it. And this is where Apple has a tough decision. Do you chase thinness or battery? Because if Apple makes this thing incredibly thin and gives us mediocre battery life, that would be a terrible trade. A foldable has two displays, one of them is huge, and large OLED panels use power. So battery capacity matters a lot more here than on a normal iPhone. And this is where Apple could use the two-half design to its advantage. Instead of one battery, you can split the battery cells across both sides. That helps with balance, and potentially gives Apple more room to use irregular battery shapes. But don't expect magic. If this thing opens to nearly 8 inches and runs a high-refresh OLED display, Apple still needs serious capacity. I'd want battery life at least in the same real-world range as a Pro Max. Anything less and people are going to notice immediately. Think about it. You buy the most expensive iPhone Apple has ever made, open that giant screen all day and then need a charger by 6 p.m. No thanks. Now the camera, this is where I think Apple may surprise people in a completely different way. Because everyone assumes the first foldable will just take the Pro Max camera system and put it in a folding body. I'm not sure that makes sense. The camera hardware is one of the thickest parts of a modern iPhone. Big sensor, large lenses, periscope-style zoom hardware, stabilization, all of that takes space. And on a foldable, space is already a problem. So Apple may have to choose. Do they make the foldable thicker to keep the full Pro Max camera system? Or do they simplify the cameras to keep the device thin? That could become controversial. Because imagine paying $2,000 or more and finding out the cheaper Pro Max has the better zoom camera. Would you accept that? Some people probably would, because they're paying for the folding display. But at that price, I think most buyers will expect the camera to be flagship level too. And this is where the inner camera gets even more interesting. Do you put a normal punch hole camera inside, or do you hide it under the display? An under-display camera would make the big inner screen feel much cleaner. But current under-display cameras still make compromises in image quality, and Apple is usually very careful about putting bad cameras on expensive products. So if the company does hide the inner camera, it has to be good enough for FaceTime and video calls without looking soft and washed out. Now here's a more interesting question. Does a foldable iPhone even need the same Face ID system we know today? Because fitting the full true depth hardware into both displays would be difficult. One possible route is keeping Face ID on the outside display, then using a simpler inner camera for calls. Another option is a different biometric setup altogether, and that brings Touch ID back into the conversation, not necessarily under the display. Maybe in the side button. Would Apple actually bring Touch ID back for a $2,000 foldable? It sounds weird, but mechanically it could make a lot of sense. Foldables change how you hold the phone, sometimes closed, sometimes open, sometimes sitting on a table. A side-mounted fingerprint sensor can work in all of those positions. Would you care if Face ID disappeared from the inside screen? That's actually a bigger decision than it sounds. Now software. This is where Apple absolutely cannot be lazy, because if you open an iPhone and all you get is a stretched iPhone app, what's the point? The inner screen needs proper multi-window behavior, not just bigger apps. Imagine messages on one side, Safari on the other, or mail with the message list on the left and the full email on the right. That part is easy. The interesting part is continuity between folded and unfolded states. You're using maps outside. Open the phone. The map should expand instantly. No reload, no weird animation, no app restart. Close the phone again. Same place, same state. That sounds simple. It isn't. Every app has to respond correctly as the screen changes shape. And this is where Apple has an advantage. It controls iOS. It controls the hardware. It controls the App Store rules. So Apple can push developers to build proper, adaptive layouts. And honestly, that might be more important than the hinge. Because hardware gets you interested. Software decides whether you still love the phone 3 months later. And here's another thing I'd want. A real tabletop mode. Fold the phone around 90 degrees. Top half becomes the display. Bottom half becomes controls. For FaceTime, the top half shows the call. Bottom half can show controls or messages. For video, top half plays the content. Bottom half gives you playback controls. For the camera, one side becomes a viewfinder. The other becomes a control surface. That's where a foldable starts doing things a normal iPhone physically can't. And if Apple does this properly, developers could use the hinge angle as an input. That's interesting. Not just phone is open or phone is closed. The software could know 30 degrees, 90 degrees, 120 degrees, fully flat. Different positions, different behavior. Now we need to talk about durability, because this is the question people are going to ask before spending serious money. How many times can the hinge fold? Current foldables are often rated for hundreds of thousands of folds. At 200,000 folds, for example, even opening the phone 100 times a day would mathematically give you more than 5 years before reaching that number. 200,000 divided by 100 is 2,000 days. That's roughly 5.5 years. But lab tests aren't real life. Dust is real. Sand is real. Keys in your pocket are real. Dropping the phone while it's half open is very real. And the inside screen is still softer than normal cover glass. That is one thing Apple cannot completely escape. A folding display needs flexibility. Flexible materials don't behave exactly like the hard glass on a normal iPhone. So the first generation Apple Foldable could still be more delicate than a Pro Max. And if Apple charges more than $2,000, Apple Care on this thing is going to matter. A lot. Now we finally get to the chip, and this is where people will probably focus too much. Of course, Apple will use a high-end chip. It has to. You're driving 2 displays, potentially multitasking, running big screen apps, maybe gaming, maybe local AI. But raw speed isn't the issue. Cooling is. A foldable gives Apple more total surface area, but each half can be extremely thin. So where does the heat go? If the processor sits in one side, that half can get noticeably warmer than the other. Apple may need a larger graphite system, vapor chamber, or some other heat-spreading design to move heat across the chassis. And this matters for gaming. Imagine playing a game on the big inner display. That's exactly the use case where this thing should be amazing. But if the phone throttles after 20 minutes, then the huge display loses some of its appeal. So I'd care less about whether the new chip is 20% faster and more about whether it can hold that performance for 30 or 40 minutes. Now price. This is probably where half the audience disappears, because Apple's first foldable is not expected to be cheap. Reports around the product have floated prices somewhere around $2,000 to $2,500 strisk. Now stop for a second. At $2,000 strisk, you're already well above a normal Pro iPhone. At $2,500 strisk, you're entering serious laptop territory. So Apple has a problem. What exactly are you buying? A phone? A small tablet? Both? Because if the answer is genuinely both, the price becomes easier to understand. Say you would normally buy a Pro Max and an iPad mini. Now one device replaces both. That's the pitch. But if you already own an iPad and you already like your Pro Max, then suddenly the foldable becomes a very expensive way to save one device from your bag. And that's why I don't think the first Apple foldable is for everyone. Not even close. Now, release timing. Apple has not officially announced this product in the information I can verify here. But supply chain and analyst reporting has repeatedly pointed to this 2026 to 2027 period asterisk for Apple's first foldable iPhone. And if Apple does launch it alongside the normal iPhone lineup, September would obviously be the window everyone watches. But I wouldn't assume a normal launch. This is new hardware, new hinge, new display stack, new production process that can create low yields. And low yields mean limited stock. So even if Apple announces it in September, actual availability could be tight. Very tight. And if the price lands above $2,000, Apple may not even need to build Pro Max level volumes. This could start as a lower volume Halo product, more like an ultra category, expensive, limited, designed to prove the idea first. Then Apple improves it over the next 2 or 3 generations. And honestly, that would probably be the smarter approach. Because first generation foldables are difficult, even for companies that have already made several generations. Now let's answer the question that actually matters. Who should buy this? If you love trying new hardware, you use your phone for work, you read a lot, you multitask, you travel, and you already carry both an iPhone and a small tablet, this could make a lot of sense. Especially if Apple gets the software right. Open it for work, close it for normal use. One device. That's the dream. But if you mostly use your phone for social media or camera messages, YouTube, and normal apps, you don't think you need this. Not at $2,000 plus. A Pro Max will probably be lighter, simpler, more durable, and possibly better in areas like cameras or battery. At least in the first generation. And there's another group I would tell to wait. People who hate first generation problems. Because even if Apple makes the hinge excellent, even if the crease is tiny, even if the software is good, this is still Apple's first attempt at a completely new iPhone form factor. Generation 2 will almost certainly be better. Thinner, cheaper, more refined, better battery, maybe better cameras. That's usually how new hardware works. So if you want the safest purchase, wait. But if Apple really manages to solve the crease, keeps the folded thickness around normal phone territory, gives us strong battery life, and builds software that makes the 7.8-inch display genuinely useful, then this could be one of the biggest iPhone changes we've seen in years. Not because it folds. Samsung already proved that part years ago. The reason this could matter is simpler. Apple could finally answer the question foldables still struggle with: why do I actually need one? And if Apple has a good answer, then yeah, this might be the first foldable that convinces millions of iPhone users to care.